let me summarize briefly the content we have covered the last time. So I have explained the assessment standard for school mathematics, right? So based on the assessment standard, I explained the first one, mathematics standard, right? From the perspective of mathematics, I explained the value of assessment item. And secondly, I explained the learning perspective, right? So you may remember, I'm going to upload this file, on the website. And third one, equity standard. Fourth one, openness standard. Fifth one, inference standard. So the last one, coherence standard. Can you remember all the contents we have covered? So basically, you may not consider, the important perspective of 6 standards, in terms of how to develop assessment item, to evaluate student understanding of mathematics. However, based on, 6 standards, you may think of, oh, I need to develop, different perspective on, developing assessment items. So that is the main purpose, okay? So after reviewing the PowerPoint, right, which is I'm going to upload, you need to think about what is the main goals and purpose of developing assessment item before developing your own assessment item, right? Always, everything should be considered based on purpose and goal, right? Otherwise, you may lose your way to approach anything, right? So that's why I'm emphasizing, first of all, what is the purpose, what is the goals of developing assessment item? Because I want you to think by yourself, what is the purpose, what is goals of assessment item in teaching mathematics? So if you developed some philosophical issue, basically 6 standards related to philosophical issue of developing assessment item, I'm going to shift our focus from philosophical issue to developmental issues. In other words, I'm going to explain what kind of mathematical process can be used in developing assessment item. So once again, this is the purpose of during the semesters of this course, how to develop assessment item, how to make evaluation standard based on the assessment item. Last time I also think about many important perspective in terms of performance assessment, like you need to think of by yourself, how many different kind of assessment items possible in order to evaluate student understanding of mathematics, not just multiple choice. There are many different kind of assessment ideas can be used in your teaching. So therefore, I just suggesting different kind of constructive response assessment, mathematical essay, oral assessment, self-evaluation, peer evaluation, projects. I also defined what is the PA, what is the essay, what is the mathematical essay, right? So think by yourself what kind of definition you can develop your own definition about in Korean 서술형 평가 수리 논술, right? Next, based on the philosophical issue I explained to you, you may ask yourself how to evaluate students doing mathematics in assessment in order to appeal to their curiosity and interact simultaneously In other words, think about this way. Whether you teach your student doing mathematics or just memorization, from time to time, it does not matter to students because they are focusing on what? Assessment, right? That's why assessment is so important issue to students. So in that perspective, why developing a good assessment is so important? You may easily guess, right? Because assessment can decide how students think mathematics, right? If you're going to provide just memorization related assessment item, students think of memorization is enough, right? First, there's a success in mathematics, right? That's why you need to think of, as a pre-subs teacher, you need to think of what kind of assessment is better provided, especially to evaluate student understanding of mathematics. So one thing, students doing mathematics have been emphasized in the area of mathematics education during the last 2 decades. Because math educator, mathematician, doing mathematics is so important because students create their own mathematical ability and capability, right? So probably partial answer to that question, if a student can be actively engaged in doing mathematics, they may be motivated enough to perform their best in the classroom and on assignments. But here is the question, what is the doing mathematics, right? One of the simple probably answer to that question, just following mathematicians' way of doing mathematics, right? Many mathematicians, especially, have you ever participated in a meeting? What is that? In Seoul, last maybe July, isn't it? Have you ever heard the meeting, conference meeting, mathematician meeting, international? So some mathematician got a field medal, right? From time to time, many famous mathematicians emphasize students need to do mathematics instead of memorization or just memorization skill. Why mathematicians emphasize that kind of perspective for students, right? But you need to think about first, what is the doing mathematics, right? Because mathematician as well as a math educator emphasize doing mathematics is so important for students to better understand mathematics in the classroom. So what does it mean to do mathematics, do you think? One of the simple documents you can use is NCTM standard because NCTM standards were developed by mathematicians, by both mathematician and math educator. So what is the mathematics? What kind of mathematics should be taught to students in school? In order to answer that question, mathematician and math educator got together and they developed NCTM standard. That's why NCTM standards often used to develop any assessment item as a conceptual framework of developing assessment item. So what does it mean to do mathematics? According to NCTM standard, they emphasize 5 doing mathematics. Take a look at. What is the first one? Problem solving. Second one, reasoning and proof. Third one, communication. What about fourth one? Connection. The last one, representation. The first miscellaneous item is going to be related to this. Think about 5 doing mathematics. as a group. What is the meaning of what is the meaning to you? From your perspective, what is the most important factor in doing mathematics? What should be emphasized? I'm going to analyze in depth 5 different components in doing mathematics. What is the meaning of that according to NCTM standard? And you need to think by yourself, what is the doing mathematics to you? What perspective should be emphasized? After collecting your data, your group data, I'm going to show you different perspective. Different people may have different perspective. So as a pre-service teacher, so what kind of perspective should be emphasized? You may ask yourself, and you also need to look at others' opinion about that, right? That's why I'm going to assign the first miscellaneous item as a group work. Your group need to work on together based on these 5 doing mathematics in the NCTM standard. I'm going to explain, and then I'm going to assign maybe today or next Tuesday, depending on how much we are going to make a progress. Take a look at. From your perspective, what is the problem solving? One of the important things as a pre-service teacher or math educator, you need to define yourself what is the meaning of the term which you are going to use. But every day, right, in every class, in mathematics, we are using problem solving, right? But from time to time, nobody, right, may not clarify their definition. But among people, they may use different definition, right? What is the problem solving? Today is 11th, right? Wang Jian. What is the problem solving from your perspective? Just your perspective on problem solving based on your experience or any course experience, whatever. She already, pointed out, a lot of things, right? Right? Planning, right? Executing, a lot of things she already defined in the process of, problem solving. What about 21, Song Kwang-il? What about your opinion about that? Anything? Do you want to add or anything? No idea. Kim Jin-gun, 31. Yeah. Just many problem solving. How can it call? It's a kind of itinerary definition, right? Learn once again, if you want to define problem solving, you cannot use the word problem solving in the definition, right? Otherwise, it's going to be learn again, right? Just think about the definition. In order to define any term, you may not use the same word in the definition, right? Otherwise, it's going to be too complicated. What about Byung-soo? 41.
주어진 상황에서
At least you define three of them, right? First of all, situation. In math education, it is often called context. What kind of context are you going to use, right? Definitely, if you are going to develop any mathematical essay problem, you should consider context, right? There are two different kind of context, real life context and mathematical context. Real life context means you can use, for instance, the game or maybe any kind of sports or any kind of card game or something. That is the real life context, right? Or even you can use sports like baseball or basketball, right? In mathematical context means you need to use a mathematical context, linear equation or quadratic equation or cubic equation, right? Or any other mathematical context. Also, he pointed out some the knowledge, right? Different kind of knowledge should be used in order to problem solving. Also, he pointed out what is answer, right? From time to time, students may not develop their own answer, right? Have you ever experienced student who solved mathematical problem, but they may not point out the answer correctly? For instance, after solving linear equation or quadratic equation, after getting two different solutions, they're supposed to select only one solution because only one fit for the answer, right? In that situation, but they may not point out, right? Because they may not fully understand, right, what is going on based on their problem solving. Therefore, you need to think about many good aspects. But take a look at, according to the NCTM standard, they pointed out several things. As you pointed out, Byung-Soo, build new mathematical knowledge through problem solving, but much more focused on building instead of using, right? But anyway, so you need to think about mathematical knowledge, right, should be related to problem solving. But problem solving should enable all students. And after finishing problem solving, what can you do, right, for students? Therefore, NCTM standard pointed out building new mathematical knowledge through problem solving is an important issue, right? Just think about it. Not only problem solving, but also building new mathematical knowledge should be emphasized, right? In your assessment item, from my perspective, right? That's going to be really productive in terms of teaching mathematics. What about second one? Solve problems that arise in mathematics and in other contexts. I briefly explained, right? Just think about, from time to time, some problem related to only pure mathematics, right? For instance, just solving quadratic equation. But that's from time to time valuable, right? That's not useless information, right? They are supposed to understand how to solve a quadratic equation. And then what? They can apply, right, those formulas to real-life context. Therefore, solving problems that arise in mathematics as well as in other contexts. What about apply and adapt a variety of appropriate strategy to solve a problem? This is kind of much more focused on strategy, right? There are a lot of different kind of strategy, right? Especially in mathematical essay problem, from my perspective, right? But how to select one appropriate strategy compared to others, right? That's going to be so important issue, right? Because you can approach A, B, and C to the same problem, but how can you decide A is better than B or C, or B is better than A or C is better than A or B, right? In your teaching, how can you decide among A, B, C? How can you emphasize different perspective to students? Why A is better than B or C? In what aspect, why B is better than A or C, right? From time to time, there is an absolute answer, right? But sometimes there is no absolute answer, right? You need to think about this issue as well in problem solving. Finally, monitor and reflect on the process of mathematical problem solving. In math education, this is called metacognition. In other words, something thinking process is going on, but in student's mind, take a look at, from the sky. Oh, I'm doing this way. Oh, I'm doing wrong. I need to go back. Right? That's very important process, right? This is called metacognition or meta rule. Therefore, monitor and reflect on the process of mathematical problem solving. Even if you are emphasizing this perspective, meta rules, however, how to evaluate student meta rule or metacognition by using assessment item. That's why developing assessment item is not that easy task, right? So think about, by using this 4 component, how can you make an assessment item by applying and adapting a variety of appropriate strategy to solve problem? Any ideas? For instance, let me select only one of them. Do you have anything in your mind? This part. There are 4 different perspectives, right, in problem solving. But in order to evaluate student ability in applying and adapting a variety of appropriate strategy to solve problem, how can you develop an assessment item, do you think? Just I want to give you an example, and then you can better think of how to use this doing mathematics in developing assessment item. 철호야, do you have any idea? Yeah. Uh-huh. Right. That's the key idea, right, in the third perspective of problem solving. But I'm asking, what kind of assessment item can you think of in actually? So in other words, if you're going to provide this problem in your mind, you may evaluate student ability or capability in applying and adapt a variety of appropriate strategy in solve problem. To solve problem. Any concrete idea? Have you ever seen any problem related to that? Based on your experience? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
그럼 이제 문제 상황을 이제 그 원에 관련돼서 원과 이제 원의 이제 중심각을 이용해서 삼각형을 만들어 주면 이제 그런 방법으로 넓이를 구할 수 있는 문제 상황을 제시를 하면 이제 학생이 적절하게 삼각형의 넓이를 구하라는 문제를 받았을 때 어떤 전략을 이용해야 될지 이제 정하겠죠. 그런 문제를
that's a good examples, I think so. But let me explain more precisely. For instance, what about this way? After providing 2 different algorithms, for instance, student A solution, student B solution, you may ask which method, right, more efficient or more effective or even more generalizable, right? In algorithm or any strategy, generalizability, right, is so important, right? But one of the important skill in here, you can actually show two different strategies, right? After showing two different strategies, you may ask your students, right? Even just a simple question, which is wrong or which is right? Why do you think so? Right? Even sometimes you may ask, which is more generalizable, right? Even though maybe both of them generalizable, or sometimes both of them are not generalizable to every number or every situation, right? For instance, multiplication table. Can you remember the Indian multiplication skill, right? Did I show you? Oh, not this course. Creative and character education I used. Anyway, in India, there are many different kinds of multiplication strategy. But after showing two different strategies, you may ask, which one is generalizable or which one is better? And then you can, right, evaluate student answer by using that. Then maybe after looking at two different strategies, student may develop, right? Oh, two different strategy, and how can you adapt one of them? Why one is better than the other, or even why one is more effective than the other? Do you understand my question? My answer to that question? Anyway, think about more concretely. That's why I'm going to assign the first miscellaneous item. You're supposed to select one of the 5 doing mathematics. This is the problem solving. And then you're supposed to analyze for each component. What kind of problem is more appropriate for each component, okay? And then I'm going to collect all the answer from your group, and then I'm going to show your answer to all of you, and you are going to have discussion time about that issue. Make sense to you? That's why you should understand right now what is the problem solving based on what? The 4 components according to NCTM standard. Make sense now? Do you understand all these components in problem solving? Just that this is the beginning time, okay? Therefore, you should understand, first of all, 4 different perspectives. You may develop different kind of perspective in problem solving. However, right now, you first need to understand 4 different perspectives in problem solving based on NCTM standard, okay? Later, we may discuss more about the problem solving. But right now, your first priority is to understand 4 different perspectives in problem solving according to NCTM standard. Make sense? Because this is related to first miscellaneous item as a group work. What about reasoning and proof? I think you may better understand what is the problem solving is, right? But now you may think about reasoning and proof. What is the reasoning and proof? You may think about induction and deduction, right? If you're going to hear the word reasoning and proof, you may think of easily induction and deduction. Even though there is another duction or deduction. What is the reasoning and proof? What kind of perspective can you think of if you are going to hear the word reasoning and proof? 성수야. What about the reasoning and proof?
주어진 문제
문제 상황이 대부분 주어질 텐데 문제 상황에 있어서 그 적절한 논리적 사고에 의해서 결과를 도출할 수 있는.
But in terms of, I'm going to ask more precisely, in terms of assessment item. So through emphasis on reasoning and proof in the classroom, your students are supposed to do something, right? In terms of doing mathematics. So what kind of perspective you want to emphasize in your classroom? Especially related to only reasoning and proof, not other perspective, not problem solving, just reasoning and proof. Even though, from time to time, they are related to each other, right? So obviously. But for your better understanding, I discriminate. I differentiate, both of them in the category.
저는 서술형 평가 기준이라고 생각하면 될 것 같은데.
네.
단순히 삼각형의 합동 조건을 합동인 걸 보여서 문제를 풀어야 되는 문제가 있는데 그 합동인 거를 그냥 합동이라고만 하고 문제를 풀면은 점수를 평가를 좀 낮게 하고 그 합동인 이유에 대해서 뭐 에세이 있으면 S가 왜 S가 성립하는지 A가 성립하는지 S가 성립하는지에 대한 이유가 적혀 있고 안 적혀 있고에 따라 평가 기준을 높게 하고 낮게 하고 그걸로 기준을 삼는 거예요.
Right. In your answer, probably, whether students provide the rationale for their reasoning is an important issue, right? So why this is correct, why this is appropriate. That's a good point. That's a good perspective, right? You may think about, how can you evaluate student rationale, right? Because, Sung-Soo just pointed out, right? Not just doing is not enough. Students are supposed to provide their rationale, right? Or reason why doing that way. What about the others? 윤서야. What perspective do you want to emphasize? Sung-Soo pointed out just, rationale should be emphasized in terms of, developing assessment item. In the category of reasoning and proof, what perspective should be emphasized from your perspective? Nothing? 재훈아.
앞서 말씀하셨던 그 프로블럼 솔빙이랑 복합적으로 생각해 봤을 때 이게 수학적으로 논리적으로 다 맞는 식으로 전개를 해나가도 그게 문제 해결 방향이랑 맞지 않게 그동안 방향으로 흘러가고 있는 올바른 질문이라고 하시죠.
예.
그래서 말씀하신 프로블럼 솔빙의
So how can you evaluate that? By using assessment item. So why I'm asking this kind of question? Because, developing assessment item is one of the key issue in this course, right? That's why you may point out some important perspective, right? So, this perspective is so important in doing mathematics. But after pointing out, you may concretely think of what kind of assessment item I can use to evaluate that perspective. Jeon, you just pointed out important thing, right? Because even if you are going to use even if you are going to use reasoning, but if it's kind of toward a wrong direction, that's going to be problematic, right? Therefore, there are 10-step reasoning, right? In order to solve any problem, one problem. But 10-step problem should be followed by student, right? Otherwise, he or she may have a long conclusion, right? That's why, the point you just, addressed is so important in reasoning and proof. Do you have any idea, Jaewoon? You just pointed out an important thing, right? I think you agree with that. But I'm asking once again how to develop assessment item more precisely. I think one of the just simplest way to evaluate student understanding of the mathematics, like the point you addressed. Maybe after analyzing 4-step or 5-step or 10-step, right? Any reasoning problem. But from your perspective, this step is so important process. And then you may provide maybe, even though this is not perfect, but I just come up with this idea based on your answer. So after showing 10-step, you may remove the 4 or 5-step, right? And then you may ask what kind of reasoning you're supposed to use at this step, because this is the proof process or reasoning process or student A's reasoning process to solve this problem. What kind of the answer should be emphasized here? You may use maybe multiple choice, right? Like you may often solve that kind of problem. I think that is the one or process, right? Or even if you are going to showing the 3 process, right? And then just showing final answer, right? What kind of reasoning this student may use to solve this problem? He correctly solved this problem, but what kind of strategy, right? Student may need to explain about that, right? Or you may show some wrong reasoning, right? Because there are some minor mistake, and then you may ask your student, where is the problematic perspective, right? If student didn't understand deeply those process, they may not find out, right, that perspective. But you'll intentionally input those perspective because students often make a mistake in that process. So you may provide all 5 steps, but there is one mistake. If a student didn't carefully read those process, they may agree, this is all process correct. They may not find it out, right? But if they carefully read all those processes, there is a mistake. Therefore, you can provide 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps. What is problematic, or what is the problem in this problem solving, like that? But that is another way, right, to evaluate reasoning process. Anyway, think about this is the way, okay? From the 5 doing mathematics, you may develop this kind of capability. What kind of assessment item I can develop, right, to evaluate the perspective you may provide, right? This is one of the main, purpose and goal in this course. That's why at the end of semester, right, your group are supposed to develop mathematical essay problem. But based on what kind of skill, what kind of doing mathematics, what kind of real life context, what kind of mathematical context you are going to use, and what about the rubric? During the second half of semester, I'm emphasizing rubric as well. But as I said, during the first half of semester, I'm emphasizing how to develop assessment item. Based on what? Conceptual framework. As I said, I'm going to explain NCTM standard as well as team study. Anyway, based on these 2 big studies, you may think of what kind of conceptual framework you may use in order to develop reasoning and proof, or doing mathematics, like reasoning and proof. First of all, take a look at recognize reasoning and proof as fundamental aspect of mathematics. Have you ever thought about any assessment item? Maybe probably not, based on your experiences. This might be difficult, but still possible. You'll think of it this way. What about to make and investigate mathematical conjecture? Any problem can you think of related to this perspective? Do you understand what is the conjecture, right? In mathematics course, you often heard the conjecture, right? Conjecture 1, conjecture 2, right? In middle school and high school mathematics, what is the conjecture, do you think? Any problem can you think of based on your experience related to this perspective? You solved many problems, right, in middle school and high school. Any problem related to that? Make and investigate mathematical conjecture. 정문아. Any problem can you think of? 왜 그렇게 침묵을 지키고 있어? Just simple problem you can think of. What is the conjecture, by the way? What is the conjecture? Anyone? Can you define? 정훈아. Can you think of any conjecture? What is the conjecture, by the way? Any concrete problem can you think of related to that? You should differentiate in order to do the homework assignment, the first miscellaneous item, right? That's why I'm asking continuously. What kind of problem can you think of? I think one of the simplest problem, probably this one. In the sequence problem, right, in high school, after showing maybe first 5 items, and then problem may ask you, what about 100th item? Right? Even though if they understand fully the formula, right, that is kind of conjecture, right? Because after looking at the first 5 or 3 or even 10 cases, they can make a conjecture what is going on in 100 case or even 1,000 cases, right? If there is sequence. That is one of the simplest the problem related to this perspective. Or this is one case, right? After showing some shape, right? This is case 2, n equal 2. What about n equal to 100? What kind of shape, right? Or what kind of length of all the shape or area of all the shape? Those kind of problem, they should imagine, right? What is going to be happen if n equal to 100, after understanding what? N equal to 1, n equal to 2, n equal to 3, right? That's why this can be called as a conjecture instead of formal proof or formal reasoning. Make sense to you? I hope you understand better. Also, develop and evaluate the mathematical argument and proof. This is obvious, right? You can simply ask any proof problem, right? Well, it's just a simple argument problem you can provide, right? And then you may judge student arguments about that problem. Also, select and use various type of reasoning and method of proof, right? Just think about this one as well. you may provide, instead of just, problem solving, maybe formal proof or reasoning process, you may compare or contrast, right? Both of them, or, you may ask after showing, one of the simplest problem I used in this category, for instance, I provide not just a standard algorithm, just, student invented algorithm, for instance, division or, multiplication or anything, or quadratic equation, whatever you want. But I used, maybe in division problem, I'm showing you 3 different strategy or 3 different proof. In this case, because reasoning and proof, 3 different proof. And I may ask my students, which one is generalizable to all the problem, right? Because for a given problem, there are only specific cases, right? For instance, 20 divided by, or 105 divided by maybe 7. And then I'm going to show you 3 different proof or 3 different reasoning. And then I may ask student, which one is generalizable to all the problem, 3-digit number divided by 1-digit number, something like that, right? Then maybe 2 of them may not generalizable, right? Because that division just specific to that case, that problem. In other words, that strategy can work for that specific case, but not all problem, right? Students need to realize those kind of reasoning, right? Otherwise, that's going to be problematic, right? For their understanding of mathematics, the rest of division. That's why those kind of problem can be effective in this category. Do you understand better? What is the problem solving? What is the reasoning and proof? I really do hope for you to better understand now, okay? So what about communication? Communication, one of the complicated category, because I'm a kind of an expert on communication. That's why it's way too complicated. But anyway, according to NCTM standard, they define several categories as well. Organize and consolidate their mathematical thinking through communication. Communicate their mathematical thinking coherently and clearly to peers, teachers, and others. Analyze and evaluate the mathematical thinking and strategies of others. Use the language of mathematics to express mathematical idea precisely. This is one of the important parts in communication. Even though, as I said before, some aspects are related to each other, right? You can apply from time to time. This is a part of communication. This is part of problem solving. This is part of reasoning and proof. That is obvious because doing mathematics kind of interwoven process, right? Not just isolated process. That makes sense to you? Therefore, all 5 components may connect to each other. But what about how can you evaluate this part? Or how can you think of this part? Use the language of mathematics to express mathematical idea precisely. From time to time, right? While you're taking mathematics course, especially in the university, right? Mathematician, not in Korean university, maybe other university, right? Professor deducted some point because you may use the wrong symbol or wrong, right, representation. Have you ever experienced that kind of thing? No? For instance, in high school, have you ever deducted some point, combination symbol differently? NCR or CNR, which symbol did you use? NCR? Or sometimes CNR can be used, right? So, symbolic representation is another important issue to communicate, right? Mathematics. Therefore, some mathematicians very strict in terms of using mathematical symbol or representation. I had, some experience like that. For instance, I used some, notation differently, but mathematicians dislike that kind of notation. Therefore, they can deduct some point from the answer, because even if they're correct, but they may not want to use that kind of symbol in that situation. Anyway, they do have different perspective in terms of using, mathematical language. Anyway, so this is very complicated word, by the way, the language of mathematics, right? Not only the word used, but also symbolic representation. Both of them can be, included in the category of the language of mathematics. So anyway, think about communication as well, all four category. The first one, connection, should be made in a mathematics classroom to help the student. So what kind of connection should be emphasized, for instance, in your mind? Connection is another aspect, right? But in your mind, there is something is going on, right, in terms of connection. Have you ever think of connection? What is connection? Especially in terms of developing assessment item. What kind of perspective should be emphasized in order to emphasize doing mathematics in assessment item? 소영아. 안 모를 줄 알았지? What kind of connection? So there are many connections going on, right, in doing mathematics. But have you ever thought about in your assessment item, so what kind of perspective should be emphasized? If you are going to be a teacher, right? But the connection is so important issue to student. So what kind of perspective should be emphasized in assessment item from your perspective? You may experience a lot from my perspective in high school and middle school. You already saw many problems like that. Can you think of anything? Connection problem. 모르겠어. 성룡아. Anyway, can you think of any connection problem? 예? 좀 더 크게만 이야기해 줄래요? 예. 예, 예. 예, 예. Yeah, that's a good point because there are many connections going on. First of all, you need to think about in mathematics. Obviously, there are two different perspectives. One is algebraic perspective, right? The other is geometric perspective, or shape, or anything you may point out. In that problem, students need to understand what? Shape first, right? What is going on, right? But those understanding should be translated or transformed into the what? Algebraic or numeric understanding of mathematics, right? Otherwise, they may not solve that problem. What else? One of the simplest examples you may experience, complex addition, right? A plus bi plus c plus di. Then a plus c plus b plus di. Right? That is just simple addition. But what about the geometric representation of that addition? Right? Parallelogram, right? You should understand that should be diagonal point, right? Make sense to you? But there are two different understandings. One is just what? Algebraic addition. right? What about the other? Geometric understanding of that addition, right? That is obviously connection problem, right? Do you think of, they are different? They are the same? Let me ask you just a simple question. Whether it is connection problem or not, you can simply decide. For instance, in complex number case, if students understand a plus bi plus c plus di problem, they can understand geometric problem? Obviously not, right? Even if they can understand a plus bi plus c plus di equal to a plus c plus b plus di, they may not solve geometric problem. Do you agree with that? Then that should be connection problem. That is not automatic. If a context should be changed, student may not understand, right? That's why algebraic representation, geometric representation, totally different context. That is the simplest problem in the category of connection, right? Anyway, so just I want to explain one example for your better understanding of connection. Think about different category defined according to NCTM standards. Recognize a use connection among mathematical idea. Obviously, different ideas still need to connect each other. Also what? Understand how mathematical ideas interconnect and build one another to produce a coherent whole, right? Because obviously, if you're going to use algebraic idea and geometric idea simultaneously and they can solve this problem, right? That is obviously connection problem. Otherwise, they may not solve that problem, right? Also, recognize apply mathematics in context outside of mathematics. This is obviously connection, right? For instance, let me give one simple example. In middle school, word problem is the same as algebraic problem. For instance, 2x plus 1 equal to 3. They can solve 2x equal to 2, x equal to 1. But all of a sudden, you provide a word problem related to the same problem, 2x plus 1 equal to 3. If student cannot solve that problem, what is the problem? They may not provide connection, right? Because that is a real-life context problem, right? But algebraic problem much more simple. According to the research results, students much more easily solve which problem? Algebraic problem, real-life context problem, do you think? Which one is easier to student? Obviously, algebraic problem much more easier to student compared to real-life context problem. Word problem much more complicated, right? Because in terms of problem solving, much more complicated. They first need to understand context, right? And they translate from the language to the what? Algebraic symbolic representation, right? And then they need to solve. Much more complicated learning process is going on, problem solving process, right? That's why word problem much more difficult to student compared to algebraic problem. What about the last one? Representation. You have experienced representation a lot, right? For instance, one of the simple example, algebraic representation, right? Geometric representation. So create and use representation to organize, record, and communicate mathematical idea. I just pointed out word problem, right? Students are supposed to develop what? Mathematical representation to solve the problem, right? This is a little different capability, right, of doing mathematics, right? Not only just a simple comparison between two of them. This one is, think about. There is, especially in developing your mathematical essay problem, if the word description was provided, still need to understand all the wording situation, right? Whatever you provide, sports or game. And then they're supposed to provide what? They're supposed to develop, or they're supposed to create and use representation, right? algebra representation, or even any drawing to solve the problem, right? That is the important perspective, right? And select, apply, translate among mathematical representation to solve problem. That is obvious, another important thing, right? Translation is one of the important topic in math education because students need to develop, right? Students need to move back and forth between two representations, right? After looking at one representation, they're supposed to translate that representation to another. Therefore, select, apply, and translate among mathematical representation, another important perspective in doing mathematics. Also, use representation to model and interpret physical, social, and mathematical phenomena. This is obviously the word problem, right? Oops. Any question until now? Do you understand 5 doing mathematics? I explain as much as I can in a short time. What are the 5 doing mathematics according to NCTM standard? Can you remember? What is the first one? Problem solving. Second, reasoning and proof. Third, communication. Fourth, connection. 5, representation. But I pointed out 3 or 4 different perspectives in each category, right? So based on the category, you should think by yourself, can I understand all of them correctly, more precisely? Because next time I'm going to assign the first miscellaneous item based on actual content, which can be used in middle school and high school. Okay? So this is doing mathematics. So you should understand doing mathematics in order to develop any assessment item. Otherwise, right, you just focus on just a simple mathematical process you have experienced. That's why I pointed out a lot of different kind of doing mathematics you may think of in order to develop mathematical assessment item. Any question? Do you understand 5 doing mathematics? I hope better now compared to before starting the class. So this is all for today. Please ask me any question related to that. Okay, I'm going to upload this PPT today. Okay, you can take a look at.